Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted to say that Dave Sanderson has joined me in the studio today. Dave, welcome.
Andrew, thank you for having me today. Very excited to be with you.
Yeah, we're on other sides of the world from each other at the moment, but it's lovely to have you on the show, and thanks for joining us today. Why don't we just start by getting to know you a little bit? Tell the audience who you are and what it is that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, after a 37-year sales career, now I have the opportunity to not only speak around the world and globally around my experiences that I've had and the lessons that I've learned. I've authored 4 books. I published my own magazine called Moments Matter Magazine. And I'm very blessed to be able to mentor people because I was very blessed early in my career. Someone took interest in me. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to take interest in somebody else. So I'm very honored to be able to do that likewise.
Excellent. And when you're not working, because I know you travel a lot as well, what's the way that you switch off? What interest do you have outside of your work experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I would say it really began about 4 years ago. I started swimming again. I had swam for 40 years, but I started swimming, but that's a whole nother story and the reason why I started swimming. But that's how I sort of get out and sort of get out of my mind and get out of my body, candidly. It allows me not only to get exercise, of course, but sort of, put my mind in a different place and focus on different things.
Well, I know your story is going to be worth listening to today and unique like it is for everybody that comes on this show. But we always start way back, and I'm of a similar age, I think, to you. And I just want to understand really back as a child, what was going on for you in that environment? What can you now look back and reflect on in terms of those events around them that shaped you into the early leader that you became?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So I grew up in a time of strife. What sort of some things we're going through now. I mean, in the 60s, we had here in the United States, 1968 was a very controversial year. We had the gas situation going on. And so we had a lot of different things going on. So I was very blessed to be able to not only witness history, but more importantly, understand, sort of different perspectives of people, which I think helped me tremendously as I was growing. And I think the first time I started having some leadership opportunity was when I was asked to be the president of what we call the Key Club in our high school. And we were starting this Key Club in our high school, and we had to get people going. But that gave me the opportunity not only to try leadership and figure out what a leader really does, because you're not very good at the beginning, very candidly, right? You're not very good at the beginning. But it put me around proximity of people who were leaders, such as I had the opportunity to meet our United States Senator when I was head of the Key Club because of my position. I also got the opportunity to meet an astronaut John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth. So I had up close and personal interaction with leaders on the not only the domestic stage but the world stage, and that gave me a really good witness and perspective on how do people manage their minds when all things are hitting together. And that was really my first experience in leadership. And then, of course, through sports and athletics, that gave me other opportunities. But I mean, that had a real impact on me back in the mid 70s, the opportunity to be around world and domestic leaders.
And it's interesting you say that. Some people that come on this show don't necessarily have those role models around them. Either they've not sought them out or they've not had them invited into their worlds. But as that was happening for you, what was going on in terms of the internal family system? What were you experiencing? How was that shaping you?
Well, I appreciate you asking that. My mother and father grew up during the Depression in the 30s, so they had a very specific mindset on how to raise kids, and it was my mother was very strict, very candid, and I'm not happy about this, but I was grounded about every other week in high school because I couldn't make curfew. She had a curfew at 10 o'clock at night, and I couldn't make it. I was trying to be one of the cool kids. I have athletics and all the things, so my mother taught me very early about discipline and having to have focus. And she inflicted discipline on me. So it was that's actually something I write about in my book, From Turmoil to Triumph, because it's shaped me. It shaped me to a mindset of, if you're going to be successful in life, you have to have, habits and discipline to be able to get to what you want. And especially in a leader, you have to be focused and not only disciplined, but be congruent with what your values are.
Let's go back then, and not everyone necessarily has an answer for this, but some do, and some can't remember, but they know they did. So for you, can you remember the earliest time that you had a dream back then, either in childhood or maybe just after that, about what it was you wanted to do with your life?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's I know exactly when it was. It was 1968. That going that far back when I was a small young boy playing sports, and I had the opportunity to be a bat boy for a day for the Cincinnati Reds in 1968 when I was 7 years old. And basically, I just had a little uniform on, sat on the bench, and but I got up close and personal with my heroes. And my dream, at that point in time, my first dream was I want to be an astronaut, like most kids. Like, man, I want to be. That's one of the coolest things. But then I got around my heroes in athletics. I'm like, wow, I want to be a baseball player. And that was my dream. And then it sort of grew until I got to college, and then I wanted to really play football because I was pretty good at football. But what you learn when you get to you're pretty good in one place, and all of a sudden you get to the next level, you're not as good. And my dad had a very focused discussion with me in 1979 about make sure how you get an education because you're not going to be a pro, which was interesting because he was right, but he was quashing my dream. And one of the things I've done with my kids, and I'm really focused, is I don't quash any of their dreams. Listen, if you want to dream big, I'll help you. I'll help you dream big. That's what I do with my clients. But I think, my dad was very, I mean, like I mentioned, he grew up in the early 30s. And, the dream was having a meal with your family during the Depression. And it wasn't a big dream at that point in time. So, but you can't judge people because they have to go through what they had to go through. And their values are based on that time frames, right? And so I've learned the biggest lesson I've learned over the last several years is don't be judgmental. And a lot of people are judgmental right now. You can't even have a discussion with them because they will judge you immediately. And I had a situation that happened, and back in 2009, it opened my eyes to that, Andrew. And man, I for a long time in my life I was judgmental, but it's changed the whole direction of my life. Is that one thing?
And it's interesting because of what we do, and obviously you'll come onto that later on a bit more. We are in a position now at the time of our lives where we can tell people and educate people and inform people about the importance of not judging people and move to this curious place, which is a far more beautiful and wondrous place to be. But you're right, when you're having that discussion from your father about actually you're not going to make it, kid, as a pro, and we don't know at that point, do we? And for many of us, we get into our 30s and 40s and still don't know not to judge people. So I really appreciate you mentioned that. So with all of the things that you've told us so far, leaving college and then facing the world as an adult, if you like, about what you're going to do with your life, and having all those role models around you taught to, and the discipline instilled to you, and the fact that you had these dreams, just talk to us about maybe the first 5 or 10 years then of being a leader and what was serving you at that point because of how you'd grown up.
Thank you. It's it really began for me shortly after I got out of university. My dad, as I mentioned, I love my dad. My dad was very, very strict and very focused. He gave me 30 days to be out of the house and have a job. And I tell people, one of the greatest things about my dad and one of the greatest lessons he taught me was be a man of your word. And he was a man of his word because in 30 days I did not have a job and I was not out of his house. So he helped me get my first job. And it was an assistant restaurant manager at a place called Howard Johnson. It was a hotel, motel, restaurant, establishment here in the United States. I knew nothing about hotels and restaurants, but I was out of his house. So, he accomplished his goal. But that turned out, first I had no experience in it, but it turned out to be one of the greatest leadership lessons of my life. Because what happened was when I got my third stop was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was a second assistant restaurant manager, which means I was not working 9 to 5. I was working second shift in graveyard. So I was, the low man on the totem pole. Andrew, what happened is there was a gentleman and his wife would come in every night for ice cream and coffee, and we would talk. And he was at that point, we're talking 1983, and he was 77 in 1983 when I first met him. And over the next several months, what I found out through a couple experiences, that he owned over 80 movie theaters and restaurants through the Carolinas. He was a multimillionaire. And he was giving me all these insights, and I was learning these things. But it was December 24th, 1984 is when everything started shifting for me. And all of a sudden, we talk about starting leadership. things about leadership started coming into play because he came into the restaurant early. It was Christmas Eve, so I was working. I wasn't off. So, but he came in, and he came in with a brand new blue Corvette, beautiful Corvette car. I know it's a sports car, right? And if you go back to the 60s, that's what the astronauts were driving. So it was the coolest car, right? And he told me he got this for his wife. Her name was Bonnie. He said, so let's take a test run. So he threw me the keys and we got in this thing. And I couldn't spell Corvette. I never smelled a Corvette, but it was the coolest thing I ever saw in my life. So we had to go up and down the road and come back. And I gave him the keys. I said, Bill, Bonnie's really going to dig this, man. This is a beautiful, she goes, you need one of these. I said, Bill, I'm making $13,000 a year. I can barely afford my rent. He goes, that's your problem. Let me show you the mindset it's going to take to be successful and be a leader. So for 13 years, he mentored me. All these lessons. That's what my book, From Turmoil to Triumph, is all about, these lessons. But one of the things he did, Andrew, and it would help me in my leadership, was he had what he called his kitchen cabinet. And basically it was his boys. And, it was a CEO of that. Back then it was called Nations Bank, but now it's Bank of America, Duke Power, all the who's who of Charlotte. And he would go occasionally to a place called Bill Spoon's Barbecue. It's an old barbecue place. All these guys in white shirts and ties, sticking their tie in with a bib on, eating barbecue. And occasionally he would invite me just to sit there and listen. And this was one of the greatest lessons. I learned probably more during that than I did during university, because I got to hear how these leaders were talking and the issues they were talking about and how the problems they were having being CEOs and COOs of companies. So it gave me a great insight of leadership and how you have to, not only inspire and also be able to influence, but the biggest lesson which served me later in my life significantly on a very significant day was the person with the most certainty in uncertain times becomes a leader. And it may not be the CEO. Whoever's given certainty, and that's one of the things about leadership, is you have to be able to give certainty to people, especially in most uncertain times. And right now we're in a lot of uncertain times.
I agree. So what I'm really fascinated by, there are many people listening to this and watching this who have been around the people that you're talking about, have read books on leadership, have tried to go on courses to improve their leadership skills. So the intentions are good. And yet, for whatever reason, it doesn't necessarily always turn out that way. So just talk us through, after that period, you'd obviously had the mentoring during that period. How did that then change your life in terms of what was happening to you then? So we're talking, I guess, mid-80s to 90s now, aren't we?
Mid-80s and 90s. And so one of the first things he instilled in me and made me, I would say made me, he suggested, but I would say more made, is to start investing more in myself than anybody else. Because, I was working for companies at that point. If I was in restaurants and I went to sales, and, if you ever work for a company, they will train you, right? But it's more product training for them. It's not you. So he said, you got to invest more in yourself so you can learn and be able to lead yourself first. So that's when I started going and investing in myself for all these, people. Like back then it was Jim Rohn and Tom Hopkins. And then later on was Tony Robbins, which is a whole nother story for me. So that was really the first lesson in leadership he taught me, is you got to invest in yourself. And at that point, later in the mid 90s, I was actually selected and asked by Tony Robbins to be the head of security for his security team. So I had proximity to a leader. And I think one of the things I talk about now when I do my talks and write my books and things is proximity is power. If you can get around a leader, just to have that proximity to hear and learn and see how they act, that gave me great influence on how to do it, because not only was I seeing and being around him, but he was running around with world leaders such as Colin Powell and Schwarzkopf and these people. And here I'm around leaders who have actually done something. See, one of the things I've learned, Andrew, and this happened about 2 years ago, it was an amazing experience for me, because I was at a conference in Orlando, and it was for speakers, and I wasn't on the stage. I was there just to sort of listen and learn. And I was talking to one of the speakers who was going to go on stage, and she talks about leadership. So I was like, hey, how did you learn your leadership? How did this come about? And what she was telling me is, she's, basically I learned all the theory. I read all the books, and, I've got it down. And then she said, what do you talk about? I said, practical experience. Leadership, when you have to step up and actually do leadership. And that's when I learned there's a lot of people who know about leadership and have the mentality and theory, but there's not that many people who have actually done it and stepped in that fire, right? And I had that opportunity to step in the fire in 2009, as you know, that actually was probably the first really major public experience that I had the opportunity to show how to step up in times of uncertainty.
And I love the fact you keep dropping 2001. It's great, and the audience will know if they've done their research into what can come there. But it is really important that we're moving to that point, and we've got plenty of space and time today. So let's do that. I'm really interested, Dave, in what you've said there. There are so many leaders out there who believe that the way to lead effectively is to make sure that they invest in other people. So they step up, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they don't always invest in themselves. So I'm really interested in your view. This is almost like being kind to ourselves, right? Because there's no point in investing in everyone else if we're not doing it to ourselves. So just go through that mindset again for me briefly about what was it then that you learned that you were worth investing in, and that was a way to be in service of many more people by doing it.
Well, after Bill gave me that insight and instructed me to do it, I was doing it, and I was paying a lot of money. My wife thought I was crazy, right? I mean, you're paying all this money to do all these things and be around all these people. But she saw the results in my sales. So she saw the numbers, right? But it was my first time with Tony Robbins. I was at his event, and this is when he did events back in the early 90s when he had like 200 or 300 people. And I had the opportunity, that's the first time I met him, and it was in San Diego, California, La Jolla to be more exact. And he said something to me about leadership and people. He said, the biggest challenge right now with a lot of people is their incongruency. They're not congruent. They talk a big game, but they can't walk it. They talk about thing like leadership, but they've never actually had to step up and actually lead people. He said the leaders for the future, and now we're in the future, people will look to those people who are congruent with their value set, their language patterns, the way they move, their physiology. And that's what I look for in leaders is, and that's one of the things I teach when I mentor people and coach people is you got to be congruent. People are looking for people who are congruent because there's so much incongruency right now. I mean, the leaders we see around the world are totally incongruent. You can point them out. They talk a big game and they do a big thing, but their actions don't back it up. So, I think that one of the biggest things that we can teach people about leadership is, you have to really have your value set. You have to understand it, but you have to live your value set and don't compromise your value set. And when you do that, people will be attracted to you. And when you have people who have that rapport, as you know, when you have rapport, you have influence. When you have influence, then you can be able to direct and be able to impact somebody more significantly.
We're moving towards 2009, but I want to understand, again, mid-90s onwards, really, as long as you want to talk about this. There are many leaders out there who've done what you've described, and yet they either hit a wall or they hit a plateau. They've been doing all the right things, and yet there's something there that isn't necessarily working, i.e. we're getting our own way and we don't know why. It's the blind spot, whatever it might be. So what was that for you? How did you become aware of that, particularly mid-90s onwards into the sort of noughties?
Yeah,
What were you
I had
noticing?
that experience likewise. I hit the walls many times. What I learned and helped me get out of that and make more progress, because it's all about progress. It's not about the accomplishment, it's about making progress. I was very blessed to always have a mentor, somebody who could look at it from a 30,000-foot perspective and give you that insight directly. And that's what my second book's about, From Turmoil to Triumph. And I write about not only what I learned from my mentor and all these great lessons, and which helped me with things like this one. I talk about those times when I hit the wall and I had to go to him and he gave me insight. But what I realized, Andrew, is our parents teach us pretty much the same thing, but they're very close to you. You may not have that. You need somebody from the outside who can give you a fresh perspective. So when I was hitting walls, and I hit many walls, there were times when sales were great and the sales were down and way low, and all of a sudden you're like, what am I doing wrong, right? Instead of asking a different question, what could I do better, and if I could do it, how would I do it? Asking yourself a different question, but having somebody from the outside give you some perspective. And so I tell people, don't be afraid to ask. You want somebody to give it to you straight. And a lot of people will not give the people, say they just want to make people feel good. Well, feel good doesn't get you outcomes. You need somebody to give you direct feedback so you can take massive action. And how do you do that? You put yourself around what I call the right associations, the right people, which is called proximity. And right now with the internet, it's like you and I got together here. We can find anybody we want to right now. If you're diligent and really want it bad enough, you can get a hold of somebody. And I've done that many times around the world. And all of a sudden I'm meeting people that I would never thought that I'd be interacting with. And all of a sudden I'm having conversations with significant leaders around the world about topics. I throw a topic out to them and they'll give me their feedback. And, I'm talking to one here the next couple of weeks from now. And he's been all over the world, and he's going to give me an insight about how to manage leadership and disruption. So you never know who you can talk to who will give you that insight.
What I love about what you're saying there, and just to build on that from my experience, is that if we view feedback from a mentor or somebody that knows different things to us or have a different perspective, a different cultural lens, whatever it might be, if we view it as a gift rather than necessarily a criticism or something that we're going to defend around it, for me, that's the way it should be received, right?
Most definitely. And, I go back to what I learned that fateful day was, don't be judgmental. And that's, and exactly what you said. Some people will get feedback and they judge like, this guy doesn't understand me, right? He'd never walked in my walk, right? But you know what? Maybe he's walked in a different walk and got there because he did it a different way. He can give you some insights. So don't judge people until you know their backstory. I mean, I'll give you a very specific example. My dad, I'll go back to my dad, we're talking the 60s now. Okay. So let's frame the time frame. We turn on the TV, you see Vietnam War going and you see all these riots, and he would call them the long-haired hippie freaks, right? That's what my dad would call them. So my thought was, okay, you long-haired hippie freaks. And now it's like, I'd love to have some long hair, number one. But number two, they just had a different perspective, right? And, not saying my dad was wrong, but I'm just saying if my dad had opened up his mind a little bit, so you know what? Yeah, I don't understand or agree a lot with them, but at least they're putting something out there to try to change something, whether I like it or not, right? So that one little thing, being less judgmental, has changed the entire direction of my life.
Thanks for that, Dave. So let's move on. In your own words, just now, talk us through, I guess, from sort of the late 90s up to 2009, what was going on for you in that time, and then the event, and just talk us through, and it'd be lovely to hear the story.
So I was a top sales producer, and I would say every other year I was in the top 10. There was a couple of years I was number one, but I was focused on, my mindset was achievement. Achieve. And once again, I go back because a lot of us try to raise our kids the way we were raised, right? So my worldview of that point in time was my dad, like my dad did. My dad went out and made the money. My mom stayed home, raised the kids, right? And my dad was never there. He would come, he'd be traveling 3 or 4 days a week like I was, right? Because my mindset was, I've got to provide for my family. He got to have a better life than I have. That was my mindset. And that's the 50s and 60s mindset. But then I realized in 2009 when something happened called the Miracle on the Hudson, all of a sudden that didn't seem as important. And that's the one that woke me up on a number of different levels. But, all of a sudden I started realizing that, what my family really wanted was my time and me to be present instead of when I come home, my mind's going 15 different directions. And once again, you got to put people in the time frames when they grew up and how the worldviews they were having at that point in time. Not to say, once again, my dad was wrong. It's just that that's what his mind in the 30s and 40s, that's what dads and moms did. Well, that doesn't work so well right now. Now we're finding out right now. If you're going to have a healthy and successful family, you got to both be present. Well, I don't care what kind of combination you got. You got to be there be present for the kids because they need that connection. They need to understand that there is right and wrong, right? Because if you leave them alone, like a lot of us have and done, they can go out on the internet and see, they can make their own judgments on what's right and wrong. And all of a sudden they're going down a pathway that now you got to course correct pretty quick, and you hope it's not too late.
So for those that haven't done the research and listened to this on the fly, just share as much as you want, Dave, just around the Miracle on the Hudson, just so people know the context of what we're going to discuss after that.
So thank you. So 2009, and once again, frame the time frame. And I don't know what it was like in the UK, but I hallucinated it was like in the United States. We're having a recession. The economy was down. The financial markets had hit the skids. And so there's not a lot of people that are investing in their companies. And I was in sales. And I was in a group called Consumer Packaged Goods, which people who made a good, distributed a good, sold a good. So I was working with companies like Coca-Cola. All right. So people who did that. So, in that year it was tough. So I was working hard. I had the biggest thing going in my company, biggest opportunity going. So a lot of eyes were on me. So, this was early January of 2009. We were on a 3-day business trip to go through their factories and distribution centers, doing all the things you do as, the discovery to understand the business so you can give them a solution. And on the third day, we were in New York City, actually technically in Brooklyn. We got done early, by 10 o'clock that morning because we were in a distribution center, which opened up at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we'd already worked 8 hours, and we already done our work. So it's like, hey, I get to go home early. Yay, team. So I got on an earlier flight, and that flight happened to be U.S. Airways Flight 1549, which is now known as Miracle on the Hudson. I gave up a first class seat at 5 o'clock for seat 15A on flight 1549 on January 15th. And as if you know the story right now, right about a minute after the plane took off, everything's cool, everything's normal until about a minute later, you hear a huge explosion, and you're in New York City. And you don't know what it is. I never heard an explosion like that on a plane, so it got my attention. So I looked out the window, I saw fire coming out, so I knew something had happened. But I, like you and probably many other people are listening, we all fly a lot, we all travel. So all right, planes usually have at least 2 engines. All right, no big deal. We'll just go back to the airport. I'm not getting home early now, right? But that's I tell people, I think that's when the miracle really started, because no one knew on the plane at that moment. No one knew on the plane what happened on the left side of the plane where I was. Also up on the right side of the plane at the exact same second. So we all just heard one explosion, one big boom. So I think everybody on that plane, I'll say everybody, majority of the plane thought, okay, we have another engine. We're just going back to the airport, right? Because no one knew it happened on both sides. So then the plane goes quiet dead. And then now you're all of a sudden, gliding in this air, and you see you're right next to Manhattan, and it's right out your window, and you're seeing people in the windows. It's like, wow, we're really close to Manhattan. Then you see this bridge coming up, which is now we know now it's a George Washington bridge. And as soon as he hits the bridge, comes towards the bridge, he says his famous words, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And now you know it's serious, because now the only thing you see in front of you in the next about 30 to 45 to 60 seconds is water. And 60 seconds later, we crash into the Hudson River. And, and from the pictures you've probably seen, from the public pictures, it looks like it landed softly and it was a beautiful. No, it was a very hard hit. He hit between 100 and 120 miles an hour. So it was an extremely hard hit. So it was a jarring hit. Plus something a lot of people don't know. It was 36-degree water and 11-degree air temperature. So the river was actually partially frozen. But he hit actually ice. So if you saw how the plane came down and why it skidded, because it's skidding on ice. So he skids about 100 or so yards, then it comes stop, and all of a sudden you look up, it's like, man, I survived a plane crash, but now you got a real problem. This is where the problem really starts for all of us. The captain and the first officer did an amazing job, and I give them all the credit. But now you got to work together as a team, because the water, now you're in a plane that's sinking in 36-degree water rapidly. Now, I played, as I referenced earlier, I played a lot of sports. And every time I was in athletics, a game, we always had a game plan. So my game plan, that last minute, was if I survive this thing, I got to have a game plan. And my game plan was aisle up, out. I kept saying in my head, aisle up, out, aisle up, out, aisle up, out. Because I know through my training, if I can stay and get in my body, I'm going to react that way. So I just kept saying it over. So if I survive, now I know what I'm going to do. So now we're down. Water's coming up. I was about waist level deep where I was. In the back, it was chest level deep. In the front, about ankle level deep, because the plane was like this on a slant. So I get to the aisle and I get my game plan going, right? All right, aisle, going up and going out the exit. But that's the moment everything changed for me, because what happened when I hit the aisle, I started hearing my mother start talking to me in the back of my head. My mother passed away in 1997. But there was something she would tell me when I was a child. All of a sudden I heard in the back of my head, it was, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And I tell people, one of the greatest things my mother taught me, and I think it's helped me in my leadership, was you got to be able to make a decision. She didn't tell me to do it. She said, if you do this, right? So I could have gone out and been fine. But my choice was you help other people first, because I was alive. I didn't know anybody in the back of the plane was alive. So that's when I climbed over the seats to go towards the back of the plane. Got back there and things were moving pretty quick because the water's like chest level deep. So I got behind the last person and just started making my way out. And if you saw the plane from the angle like this instead of the angle like this, it's actually underwater. So it's dark. And luggage has come out because of the impact. And you're just trying to make your way out, and you see the light on the right side of the plane, like, I'm out of here. So you start to get out the door, and all of a sudden you look up, and there's no room on that wing for me because it's already filled up. You look at a little boat, it's already filled up. And that's why I was inside the plane, waist deep in 36-degree Fahrenheit water for over 7 minutes, because there's no room on the wing or the boat. But people were being rescued immediately. It was amazing. 2 minutes later, that's why I give them all the credit. I give first responders all the credit. Whoever said that, I agree. They were there. But now I'm in a plane that's sinking. And I was holding on to the lifeboat because the Hudson River has one of the fastest currents in the country of rivers. That plane actually floated down the river about a half a mile in 24 minutes. So as the plane was floating down the river, the lifeboat was floating out into the river. So they kept yelling, hold on, hold on, hold on. So there's a picture of me on Good Morning America, me holding on to this lifeboat, holding on to the door, waist deep in the water. About 7 minutes later, what happened was, all of a sudden, the plane started shaking. And at that point in time, I didn't know what it was. I found out later it was a boat that actually was backing out and hit the plane. And the first thing I thought was Titanic. This thing's going down, man. You got to get out. And that's why I always thank my mom and dad, because they hadn't made me get swimming lessons when I was a child. I may be able to get out of this plane. And I had to swim for my life. Because not only was I in the water already, 36-degree water for over 7 minutes, I also was fully clothed, so that was all sticking to me. But also, there's jet fuel all in the water. And that's why I'm wearing glasses today, because I got jet fuel in my eyes from the swim. And later on, they found black spots through my eyes, and I was having a little problem seeing. But that's how I got out of the plane. But one of the parts of leadership really came out to that moment, because one of the things that people probably don't know about what happened, if you saw the movie Sully, they actually showed it. But the flight attendant who was supposed to be on the right door where I went out cut her leg. She was in the back, and a piece of metal came up on the impact and sliced her leg. So they took her out to first class on the left side. So the right side of the plane had to be managed by people who had zero experience, had to be led by people who had no experience. And that was a lesson about leadership, because in leadership, you don't have to know everything, but you got to be able to step up and give certainty in those uncertain times, and people will follow. Whoever's giving that certainty, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO, if you're the janitor. If you're giving people certainty, they're going to look to you for what to do. And that's what happened. Myself and a couple other people had to start giving direction because no one was there. We had to figure it out ourselves, right? There's no one there to help us. And that's one of the things I wrote a blog about this years ago. Is about, you got to save yourself. There's no one there to rescue you normally. You got to be able to step up and lead yourself first. And that's why I talk about personal leadership. You have to manage your state. You have to be able to do these things, because if you start losing it, everybody else is going to lose it, right? You got to give certainty to people. And that's what happened on the right side of the plane. And, fortunately for me, there's a guy who got the door out. I give him all the credit. He got that door out. It's a 42-pound door with water pressure. And he got it out. And then I had to hang out the door and give some directions of things going on, because I had the view. Everybody else is on the wing, right? Or in the boat. And so I could see the bigger picture. I was able to give some direction to some people to hopefully get some things happening. So all you got to remember, one thing you got to remember about this is, when you give an opportunity to lead. Schwarzkopf told me that back in 2001 when I was with him in Hawaii. I escorted General Norman Schwarzkopf, and he said, when you give the opportunity to lead, step up, right? That's your opportunity. And you don't have to know everything about everything. You just got to be able to know how to lead people.
Dave, do you believe what a lot of people say, in that things happen to you in this life for a reason? And if so, why did that happen when you were on that plane?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think everything happens for a reason and a purpose. And I think it serves us. I think we're put in situations to test. And I tell people, I think this is my personal belief. You don't have to believe anything, but I believe I was on that plane because I wasn't supposed to be on that plane to be able to do what I needed to do. I think it was my test. I think my mother was up in heaven saying, okay, this is it, right? This is it. Here you are. You're in a situation where you have to deal with everything you've learned in your life. It has to come together in less than 60 seconds. What are you going to do? Did you learn what you were taught, right? And can you employ that at the most critical moment, life or death moment? So I think everybody on that plane was there. I mean, I think the captain was there for a reason. I mean, if you saw the movie Sully, it's true. Not many other captains could have pulled that thing off, right? Same with the first officer. Same with the passengers. Everybody on that plane was seated in a place where they needed to be seated for a reason. And if you want to look at a bigger picture, I think this happened. So put this in perspective, Andrew. You got to look at this. This happened at 3:27 p.m. in the afternoon, New York City. That means we're right in the middle of rush hour in the busiest, one of the busiest cities in the world. And all of a sudden, this is happening on live TV. And later on was found this is the most tweeted event in the history of Twitter. And all of a sudden, people are witnessing this. Like, wow. And then I say, one of the greatest lessons out of this, Andrew, is how did 155 people who didn't know each other or care about each other come together in less than 6 minutes and do something never been done? How's that happen? It's because people check their egos at the door, leaders step up, and everybody was focused on the one mission. And the one mission of that day, if you saw the movie, it was actually stated in the movie, but most people missed it. The unspoken mission of the day was no one dies today. I think everybody checked their ego at the door and said, it's not about me. It's not about, there were CEOs, and there was a guy who owned $100 million company on a plane that I know, right? And he went out the front door and he did what he had to do. Good for him. Everybody did what they had to do, but everybody's there for a reason and a purpose. And I think it was to show people, how do you step up? How do you come together as a team? How do you do this? All different races, sets, right? Sexual orientations, right? And we're all supposed to be fighting each other, but in a matter of 6 minutes, we come together. And now we're a family. How's this happen? Leaders stepped up.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure our audience are wanting to know now, since that event and since that lesson, if you like, and how you were going to step up in the last, how many year, 16 years now?
16 years
something
now,
like that. Yeah, just talk to us about how that event has shaped your life now and what you've done, during that sort of 15 or 16 years.
It's definitely given me a different direction. I'll tell you exactly when it started. There's a couple key points always. But the moment it really started was the next day. And it was January 16th, 2009. Because what happened that night, Andrew, is, I was in the hospital for hypothermia. There's only two of us stayed the night in the hospital. I had hypothermia. Harry had fractured his sternum based on the impact. So he fractured his sternum. And my company didn't call me. And I found out my company didn't even call my wife. So when I got back home the next day, and I was there, my mind was going, media was in my face and all this going on. I said, I don't even know if my company knew that I was in a plane crash. So I went by the office, Andrew, just to check it. I had two of my kids with me because my wife did not want me to drive alone. I should have been driving at all, candidly, but she didn't want me to drive alone. So I went in the office and said, hey, I just want to let you know that I'm okay and I survived. And the first thing my manager said, you're going to Michigan next week, right? And that's the moment I realized I was just a number. I had to get out because this is not my mission. And all of a sudden I realized this is something I talk about now, because I think, and this is one of the things leaders do really well, and leaders should be able to instill in people. Everybody on this call, everybody's watching this has 4 freedoms they're looking to have in their lives. First, they want the freedom of time. They want to be able to do what they want to do when they want to do it. They want the freedom of money, to have enough money to be able to do what they want to do. Third, they want the freedom of the mission. They don't want to work for somebody else's mission. They want to work for what I'm most important to me. And fourth, it's a freedom of relationships. Work with people I want to work with. And that's the moment I realized I didn't have any of those freedoms. They were telling me they were controlling my time going to Michigan. They were capping my money because I couldn't make as much as I really thought I could make. I was working for somebody else's mission, and my manager didn't even respect me, or did I respect him? I had to get out. So that lesson right there was the motivating factor. But you're making so much money, how are you going to do it? So I had to figure the strategy out on how to do it. And that's what I talk about now. What's the strategy on how to do this? How to become an entrepreneur and how to get out. And it started with speaking. So I had the opportunity to speak around the world and raise money for the American Red Cross. I've helped raise over $14.8 million for them because I want to give back to people who need help. So that's what's really, and then I started writing my books. My first book was Brace for Impact. I co-authored, and I got Moments Matter from Turmoil to Triumph. And this one went out last week called The Limitless Life. What the lessons you learn after you go through something like this in leadership, how do you do it? It's my third book. I post my anchors. Now I can get my message out because going back, this goes back to 1997. Now I'm going to go full circle right now. Yeah, if you remember what I said about my father, one of the greatest lessons my father taught me was you got to be a man of your word. In 1997, before my mentor Bill passed away, he called me to his office. He wanted to give me something. He had lung cancer. But he went to his desk, Andrew, and he had these old pieces of paper. And he put them on my lap. He said, I want to give this to you. I said, what is it? He goes, these are the handwritten notes I wrote in 1929 about how I was going to be successful. I want to give this to you. But you got to promise me something. I said, what? He goes, do not let it die with you. He passed away in September of that year. And I had these notes. So everything that I do right now, Even this conversation we're having here is because everybody should leave everything they have behind to somebody else. Do not let it die with you. Everything I've learned is now being given away. Just giving it away. Some people employ me to do things. That's great because they want certain things, but everything I've learned is going back to that one seminal moment of 1997. I'm fulfilling, giving it away, make sure the next generations have the same opportunity. Whether they take advantage of it or not, it's up to them. But they're given the same insight and opportunities because what you know and I know, the difference what you and I have compared to somebody else is this. I think these generations now, the younger generation, are much more intelligent than both of us all together. But what don't they have? They don't have wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is being able to apply that intelligence effectively. And they haven't had enough runway to do it, right? You and I have been around a while. So we've had a few times of practice and fail and come back and fail and come back. They haven't done that. So the best thing we can do to help people is help them with this wisdom, right? I give them the insights. They got the intelligence. They just know how to use it. That's what your and my gift should be. And this is what this is all about. I think we're talking about today is what you're doing with this is you're giving back to the next generation, giving them insights on how to lead and on all the different facets of leadership, whether it's a defining moment or whether it's in corporate, whether it's in entrepreneurship. This is what you're doing and this is what I'm doing. That's why I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Love it. So I've got one last question for you, Dave. And it's really interesting having listened to you today. It's been a compelling story. Thank you. And even though you had the mentor, even though you knew you had to invest in yourself, and you did considerably, in terms of thousands of dollars, probably tens of thousands of dollars, even though you knew that it was all about self-leadership, it took that event on the Hudson for you to get into work next day and realize you didn't have any of those 4 freedoms. What advice would you give to anybody out there that doesn't necessarily have an event like that in their lives right now, and yet their days are ticking away in terms of them being able to make the real difference and have the 4 freedoms? What advice would you give?
Well, thank you. First thing I would ask him is ask yourself a different question. You know, what is it you really want? I mean, if you want to work for a company and somebody else's mission, right? That's cool, right? Many people in the world have done that. But if you're going to have true freedom, if you want to be able to do what you want, when you want, where you want, with whom you want, you've got to think in a different way. You have to think in a different way. That's why this world is shifting. The next leaders coming up are entrepreneurs. Look at Elon Musk. He was an entrepreneur. Jeff Bezos, entrepreneur, right? Even the president of the United States was an entrepreneur. So the people who are entrepreneurs think a different way because they want freedom. They want freedom not only for themselves, but for their families. I would say first ask yourself a different question. What's most important to me? And then a follow-up question is this is the one that usually sort of gets in their mind is, all right, what's most important to you? What has to happen for you to realize that? And once you answer that question, all of a sudden you say, okay, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen. And all of a sudden you're starting to develop your game plan of how can I have the freedoms, whether it's working within a company or an entrepreneur or whatever you want to do. It doesn't really matter. This is how you start putting together the game plan on how you can accomplish this. So that's what I would recommend. That's what I do when I mentor and coach people. This is how we start. What's most important? And I find out what the driving need is, and then we go after that driving need and employ that driving need to get what they want.
Love it. So that leads us to you having the opportunity now. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, Dave, find out more about you as an individual and what you do, what's the best way for them to get hold of you?
Well, thank you very much. The best way is just go to LinkedIn. Dave Sanderson is probably the best way. But my website's davesandersonspeaks.com. We put all the new content out there. Every week I'm putting new content out because what you find out, and you're doing the same thing, like we had this conversation. I've learned a couple things today that I think, you know what? Maybe this one little tidbit can help somebody else. So that's where I put all my new content out, and then I reveal it out on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Dave Sanderson, or davesandersonspeaks.com. We'd love to interact with you.
Lovely. And I really appreciate your patience today. It would have been very easy for us to go to the event, and it's a very important event in your life, but it's really good to get to understand what led up to that as well in terms of the childhood relationship with your father, the mentor. So I really, really thank you for coming on the show and spending that time with us. It's been an absolute pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Andrew.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.